in as many as 70% of the patients. So are we measuring patient-related outcomes or not? And we really have to move in that direction because that's really actually what accountable care is all about. And I want to end with a story, and this is a story that I heard from Maureen, who used to head IHI in the US. And Maureen got a call that her mother was admitted in hospital and that she was getting very sick, and that Maureen should come into the hospital, meet her mother, and she should bring all her siblings along. So Maureen belonged to a family where there were lots of siblings, and she, being the eldest, called all her brothers and sisters, and they went into the hospital. And a case conference was organized. And there, the intensivist sat with the family and said, you know, your mother's now deteriorating. She's likely to go on to non-invasive ventilation. Perhaps she will need a ventilator. Perhaps she'll go on to dialysis. So while this conversation was happening, the internist stopped the conversation and said, could I ask a question? What does mom want? And nobody had actually asked the patient what she wanted. So Maureen went and met her mom and asked, Mom, what would you like? And mom said, I've had an amazing life. I don't want to go onto a ventilator. I want to pass on peacefully at home. And the decision was made, and mom was taken home, and she passed away peacefully in her own bed, in her room, surrounded by her children and her grandchildren. And Maureen said that day I realized that there were two types of doctors looking after my mother. There was the intensivist who was absolutely brilliant, who knew everything about medicine. He was the doctor of her body. But her internist was the doctor of her soul. And I think that is something that each one of us should remember, that we need to be doctors of the body and doctors of the soul. And once we realize that, we will truly deliver accountable care. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for setting the context so right for this session. Moving ahead, we have the knowledge paper presentation by Mr. Akshay Ravi, the partner EY, and Mr. Ankur Dhandaria, partner EY. And this will be released tomorrow. So, ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome both of these gentlemen for the presentation. Can you go to the presentation?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So, welcome to the post-lunch session. I think the panel will have a task in terms of keeping you all very engaged post this hearty lunch that we have all had. And welcome, ma'am. Thank you for all what talked about all your achievements. Thank you so much for that. And to all the panelists and all the distinguished people here who are the powerhouse of healthcare advocacy in the Indian context. So, what is it that we're going to talk about right now for the next 10 minutes before the panel takes over? So, while we were discussing, I think today in the morning sessions, we've seen the torchbearers, before that the legends, and then the visionaries all talked about topics like quality of care. They talked about that is the need of the hour as we go to 2047, from where we have already come. They talked about integrated care. They talked about care at home, right? So I think as we were discussing all of this, Vicky and Varun very specifically encouraged us to look at this topic, and then we went ahead and we thought, why not create a paper on this? So what we did was we looked at almost 75,000 beds, hospitals covering 75,000 beds, 250 hospitals in 40 cities. We talked to almost 1,000 patients, almost 100 plus doctors. We also talked to almost 70 plus people in the Indian healthcare, the who's who, a lot of them are sitting here in the room today, and took their inputs in terms of what this means, what quality and efficiently managing healthcare means, because affordability, accessibility are all important topics and they need to be balanced. So looking at that, we created a paper here. However, as we get into the paper, important to set context in terms of what is the value equation or quality equation today. Right, where have we come? Dr. Sibal talked about that as a country, we have come a long way. Right, we have almost now 2x bed capacity, created over the last 2 decades. We have almost 5x growth in the MBBS seats. We have had almost 58x growth in the cath labs. Cardiac is available today in tier 3 cities as cath lab has procedures. We have seen almost 6x growth in Linacs. Right. So there is clearly the gap between the West, between the modern or advanced economies and India is reducing. Right. We have today available most of the advanced technologies in here. However, we have also done it efficiently. That's the important part, and Varun touched upon it as well, right? We are 30 to 50% lower in terms of cost for patient from a global benchmark standpoint. We are providing care at 30 to 40,000 RPOB, right, which is commendable. However, this is important to understand. When we talk about 70, 80,000 RPOB, that's hardly 5% of the top of the healthcare that we're talking about. Care is being provided at 30, 40,000. Dr. Nagar talked about it, Fitin talked about it. So I think that's the important part to understand, that most of the care is happening in a very efficient way. We talked about prices going up and care becoming expensive. But I think it's been important to understand that the increase in RPOB that has happened over the last decade or 2 decades, large part of it is because we are providing better care, we are providing higher bar of care, we are providing more tertiary, more quaternary care. Hence the RPOBs are going up, not because of pricing. In terms of pricing, it's only 3 to 4% increase, which has happened over the last decade or 2 decades, right? So it's not about making it expensive just because of that. It's because we are providing more complex, more quaternary, more tertiary care over a period of time. And I think we did not have a benchmark to assess where is India in terms of the quality of care, right? So we created a metric which we called as EYSP's Healthcare Productivity and Performance Index, to look at outcomes in terms of DALYs, in terms of life expectancy at birth, in terms of survival at the age of 65, versus out-of-pocket expenditure per capita and health expenditure. And when we looked at both, what we realized was that India is actually at par or maybe better than a lot of countries in terms of where it has gone to from a actual healthcare performance from an outcome standpoint. Question is, how do you take it ahead? How do you sustain it? How do you take it ahead in 2047? However, quality comes at a cost. As we have moved in this direction, what we are realizing is that healthcare expenditure is rising much faster than the GDP of the country. Hence, if we continue on this path without any interventions on the quality side today, or sustaining the expenditure and managing and balancing both, we will actually end up at almost 6% of the GDP by 2047 in terms of the healthcare expenditure. We are at around 2.5-3% today, right? And that's not something that we want to do, right? So that is where the interventions become extremely critical. We know that the population is going to, the 60 plus population is going to be almost double by 2047. How do we look at cohorts in terms of bringing down hospitalization in those cohorts? Or look at, we talked about chronic care cohorts, we talked about diabetics. How do we bring down morbidity? How do we bring down hospitalization procedures in those situations? Right. So looking at curbing comorbidity, looking at reducing 60 plus hospitalization, looking at reducing hospitalization expenses to the extent possible through primary care, managed care models, looking at increasing public share of spending, right? Is something, if we are able to do, I think the ability to bring down the cost to about 5%, which is where China is today, is possible. I think that's the objective. I think this is what we wanted to kind of think of from a context standpoint. I'll call upon my colleague Akshay to talk about the findings of the report, the work that we did, and what are some of the key solutions which will be there in the report tomorrow. However, before I end, I think just wanted to end by saying that a Japanese saying that the Japanese found out that the only way to sustainably reduce expenditure of cost is by having, improving quality. That's, we all know Toyota, that has the lowest cost of maintenance, and that's what it means for our patients. So I think let's go with that logic. Over to Akshay for mine.
Thanks, Atul. I think that's how the paper has really set up the context of how do we move now to accountable care. Now the next chapter during the paper, and I think all of the panelists here, we have talked about this in a prior session, is before designing a solution roadmap for India, I think we've talked about saying India should have a very unique roadmap of its own and not really let's keep all of us, let's bring together all our structural challenges, let's acknowledge and bring them together. So I think we've talked about all of these challenges today in prior sessions, and let's highlight a few of them. So I think one is India has a very unique twin fragmentation problem. Right? Both its provider is fragmented and its payer is fragmented. Right? A couple of data points here. Right? So on an average, let's say beds per hospital in India is about 25 to 30. Globally, this is typically happening. If you look at payers, also the top 5 payers would have about 40% share in some sense of total payer in India. Versus globally, this is 80% plus. I think that's something to keep in context. The second piece, I think we have all talked about primary care, we have all talked about preventive being the backbone of really sustaining quality and building quality. And there's a long way for us to go there in building that backbone per se. Right. Similarly, I think Dr. Gyani in our earlier session also talked about saying we still have low levels of formalization in some sense. And the country has gone a long way in talking about almost 20,000 of our hospitals having a touch point with insurance, or